Hello, welcome back to Intermediate Writing. Professor Kent Lee here. Today we're going to talk about logical fallacies, this in the next lecture, and it's going to lead into a discussion for the Monday lecture on avoiding logical problems and making for better arguments in your papers. Let me give you a couple of scenarios. One, imagine an election one year in some country where President Jones, she's the president, and the economy is not doing well, and her opponent, she's running for re-election, and her opponent, Mr. John Smith, attacks her and saying, look how bad the economy is. It's because of President Jones. She doesn't know what she's doing. Vote her out. Vote for me instead. Well, let's say President Smith wins in that scenario, as often happens, and the economy starts doing really well under President Smith. And then President Smith is running for re-election and say, vote for me. Look how I improved the economy. Vote for me again. You want more economic growth? Vote for me again. Well, sounds reasonable, but there's a problem. The person who's in office as president, is that really a big factor in the economy? It could be, but there could be like other factors that work beyond the control of the president that could explain why the economy was poor under President Jones and is doing great under President Smith. It could be other external factors, global factors, other kinds of factors that are driven by market innovation and have nothing to do with the president. The politicians have made kind of false assumptions about cause and effect. Scenario number 2, imagine a university has implemented an EMI program and requiring some courses to be taught in English. And later somebody does a study and says, hey, look, the students are doing better. They're getting better grades in the EMI system than before, or than other universities without EMI. Is that a valid conclusion? Not necessarily. In fact, probably not. Because for one thing, I know that some universities, like where I taught before, actually have different grading policies for EMI courses that could explain differences in grades. It may have nothing to do with the EMI. That can be a problem. So you have to be careful whenever you're making arguments, like you're doing a case study and you're saying, okay, you have this and this. Does it mean that this caused that? Is this evidence of that? Okay, you have to be careful. So we're going to look at logical fallacies today. I'm going to go through some kinds of logical fallacies. In the next lecture, I'll go more through examples. And in the following lecture on Monday, I'll tie this in with your papers. So I have a section in my book, pages 110 through 112, on fallacies. And I didn't assign it. I don't think I assigned it. I was going to have you do a Google form based on it, but I decided not to. For one reason, you've got enough homework as it is. And number 2, I think I'm not really satisfied with the design or layout of this section of my book. It's kind of like a bunch of stuff all kind of thrown together. A bunch of definitions that you're supposed to match with a dumb bunch of terms. So I'm just going to talk through them, and I'm going to kind of reorganize these into categories that make more sense. By the way, apologies for my bad voice. I still got a bad voice. And by the way, these are my reading glasses as I'm reading from some notes. I can refer you to a website, a page on my website about logical fallacies. I'll try to remember to put the link down below. There are, of course, lots of other lists on the internet with lists and explanations of logical fallacies and examples. Mine's not necessarily any better than the others, but I have tried to group them into meaningful categories. A lot of other lists would just be, here they are, and that's that. I've tried to group them into meaningful categories. At least I will in this lecture, not in the book. I didn't do that in the book, but I did that on my website. This is a standard thing that's taught in writing classes, and it's really important for academic writing, as well as for being an intelligent citizen and an intelligent consumer, so you don't get fooled by dishonest politicians or advertisers. So I have grouped them into, I'm going to group these into the following 6 categories. 1, emotional fallacies that kind of rely more on emotionalistic arguments. And these are actually kind of a subgroup of 2. The second group cause or association fallacies. That is kind of mistakes in reasoning about cause and effect or association. 3, problems strictly with the logic or the logical syllogisms. So a syllogism, the term comes from philosophy, maybe you've seen this. Let's take a bad syllogism, for example. A, Socrates is a man. B, all men are pigs. C, therefore, Socrates is a pig. Now, I've given you a syllogism which is technically correct, actually, because just by pure logic alone, C would be the natural deduction from A and B. So technically it's a correct syllogism, but it's not valid because one of the premises, at least one of the premises, are false. All men are pigs. It's kind of playing with semantics, pigs being like a really bad, disgusting man, and then overgeneralizing and saying all men are pigs. Technically a correct syllogism, but not really valid because one part is false. Or you could have one part, I could try to make a conclusion. Socrates is a man, all men are mortal, therefore Socrates is not a fish. Okay, the conclusion is not relevant. There's nothing about a fish in the first 2 parts, the premises, so it's kind of a bad conclusion. It's technically correct, but it's not based on the syllogism. Or Socrates is a man, all men are mortal, therefore Socrates should die. What? Should die? What's that? Where did that come from? Okay, so those would be problems with the syllogism, the logic itself, or the premises. Next, the 4th category will be empirical fallacies, problems with the empirical or evidence or validity, the evidence, the data supporting a conclusion. 5, semantic fallacies, that is playing with word meanings. And 6, kind of what we call complex fallacies, because they're kind of more complicated. So let me go through the emotional fallacies first. The first 2 I've got here kind of overlap, and that's the problem. Sometimes these overlap a bit, or sometimes like an advertisement might kind of use both at the same time. Ad hominem is a Latin phrase. So a lot of these fallacies have Latin names because they were first identified by Latin and Greek scholars many, many centuries ago, ancient philosophers and literature scholars who studied rhetoric, that is persuasive speaking and writing, so that they could train, for example, sometimes a philosopher would be hired by a rich person to train somebody in the art of public speaking and to school somebody. And so these kinds of scholars maybe studied and trained politicians, say how to be a good senator, how to argue for your ideas effectively in the Roman Senate. So a lot of these have Latin names, and the first 2 kind of overlap. Ad hominem, which is kind of to the man or against the man, you could say, against the man, and ad populum, to the people, an appeal to the people. So an ad hominem is kind of a personal attack on the person. And it often overlaps with ad populum. Ad populum is an emotional appeal. You're appealing to people's emotional feelings. Vote for me, I'm a patriotic, freedom-loving, patriot. So appealing to emotional feelings like patriotism. Here's a picture of me with a baby. See what a good person I am. Vote for me. Okay, emotional appeals like that. Advertisers use this a lot. Politicians use this a lot. You're kind of assuming it should be true because it's based on people's opinions. Everyone's opinion is that patriotism is good. Maybe belonging to a certain religion is good. I belong to this. I think like this. You all do, but my opponent doesn't. And then I use it to attack my opponent, and that's kind of an ad populum and also an ad hominem, especially when, say, the opponent makes some valid points, and I don't respond logically to those points, but instead by attacking him. Let's say my opponent makes a good case for universal health care, and I'm a bad politician. I say, well, my opponent is a socialist, but I am a freedom-loving patriot. Vote for me. I'm not going to do anything socialist. So I've combined an ad populum, patriotism, and an attack on my opponent. I haven't actually answered his point. I've attacked him by insulting him, saying he's a socialist, he hates freedom, he criticizes our country. Don't vote for that guy. So emotionalistic attacks against an opponent, especially when you're ignoring maybe valid points the person has made. Next, we have number 5, bandwagon appeals, and that's really kind of an ad populum that's used for maybe advertising. So for a bandwagon is kind of like a person in the old American West maybe stands on a wagon and starts shouting, vote for me, buy this stuff. Often kind of fake products. People did this in old times, say in the US, standing on a kind of wagon called a bandwagon and maybe selling some fake product. Everyone's bought this, you should buy this too. So it's basically the kind of appeal where you are saying you should buy this because other people are buying it or they're going to buy it. Maybe everyone is buying it, you should too, or be the first to buy this and you'll be really cool. You'll be popular. So it's kind of a peer pressure tactic, and it's a subtype of the ad populum, and it's used a lot in advertising. Next, we have a red herring. So if, say, police in like old movies or something, police are using dogs to hunt down a criminal who's running through like a forest or snow or something, well, a herring is kind of very smelly fish. So supposedly, the bad guy who's being hunted, he could take out some fish and throw them on the trail, and the strong smell of these fish, these herring, it comes in like a little can, and they're kind of pickled fish. You throw them on the track and they'll distract the dogs and they won't be able to find you. So a red herring is an irrelevant distraction. So for example, I remember one political debate around, was it 1986 in my country? So 92. Yeah, 92. Anyway, the Democrat Bill Clinton, he was running for president for the first time. And suddenly in the debate, and this came out of nowhere, it was not really related to the question or the context. His opponent, George W. Bush, raised a point about him protesting. Clinton, when he was in college, he protested against the American war in Vietnam. Later on winter vacation, he traveled through Eastern Europe. And so Bush raised this as a point. Explain how you can protest against your own country while you're in England, in another country. And then why did you go to Eastern Europe on vacation? What did you do there? Who did you talk to? So he's kind of implying that he did something kind of, colluding with meeting communist agents or something. I mean, why did you visit Eastern Europe? That's when Eastern Europe is communist. He's kind of implying something, and it was totally unrelated to the context of the debate. It's an irrelevant distraction, and often these kind of distractions, these irrelevant points, they are often emotional, often ad hominem, ad populum kinds of things too. It was a distraction, it wasn't related, kind of implying, this Democrat, he's sympathetic to the communist or something, which is not true. 16, personal incredulity, that's S. Is kind of claiming that can't be true because I can't understand it. I mean, I hear this, for example, with maybe less educated people who don't understand science and say, oh, how can we believe in evolution? It doesn't make any sense to us, and it doesn't make sense to any of us. I mean, none of us can really accept it. Well, that's because you're a bunch of uneducated idiots. It's proven scientific fact. So just because we can't understand it, it can't be true. Personal incredulity, it's an emotional argument. And it kind of borders on the next category of cause and association, actually. The last of the emotional appeals is the tu quoque, or hey, you too. So I remember in some years ago, there was a race between two candidates for governor in the state of Illinois, where I lived at the time. Republican and the Democrat, and actually they were both kind of centrist. They weren't very different in their political beliefs, and they were both corrupt. They were both dishonest, and the whole election campaign was basically tu quoque. A accuses B of something, and B, instead of responding, said, "Oh, A did something bad too." It was all like this. I mean, they were both corrupt, so it was easy to do. And he said, "Oh, that guy is being investigated by the government, or he took bribes." And B says, "Oh, she took bribes. Look at her. She took bribes. She did this bad stuff too." I mean, it was all tu quoque. Instead of actually answering any questions, it was like, "Oh, you too. You say I'm a socialist. Well, you are too. Or you think I'm corrupt. No, you are too. No, you are. You are." It's like, "No, I'm not. You are." Or you too. So basically, not responding to arguments by accusing the person of something similar. All right. Next, we have other cause and association problems. So 3 is F, appeal to false authority. Using the authority of a famous person as the basis for an argument. Yeah, sometimes you can appeal to a famous person as maybe support, but not really as the main support, maybe as an example or illustration. One way you see it is in advertising. This athlete like Michael Jordan endorses these shoes, and he appears on TV and says, "Buy these shoes," implying it'll help you too. No, probably not. His feet are different from yours. His shoes are not going to help you. He's not an authority on foot science in general. This happens sometimes in academic arguments. You can say, "Well, you don't believe in this? This is the Mr. Chomsky says this is the case. You don't believe in Mr. Chomsky? I don't have to believe in something just because Chomsky said so. He's right about quite a few things, but he could be wrong about some things." A person's authority does not establish something. That in itself is not an argument. It's not a valid argument. It could be sort of a secondary support or used for illustration to illustrate a point. "Oh, Albert Einstein said this," but a person's authority doesn't make it right. Nobody's authority makes something right, especially in academic matters in science or anything. Number 4, appeal from or an argument from ignorance. That's E. It's true because it hasn't been proven false yet, or you don't know that it's false. This is used by a lot of scammers. Let's say I'm trying to sell you some bracelet that's supposed to have magical health benefits. I don't have any real evidence for it. Like, I can maybe cite some really fake evidence. But I could say, "Oh, nobody's proven this is false yet." I mean, it would make sense. We know that this metal has these kinds of properties, so therefore it's going to be good for your blood flow, for your health, for your immune system, or whatever. No one's proven that it's false. So what? You don't have any real evidence that it does help. It only is, you just want to take my money. That's it. You have no real evidence. You can't assume that something is true just because it hasn't been proven false, or vice versa. The next one is, this one gets a little complex. A false correlation or false cause. So this gets back to kind of the election example I got to earlier, and it kind of overlaps with the hasty generalization sometimes, but it's a little different. You're making really an unwarranted assumption that something causes something else. So the economy is improving. Is it because it's, President Smith is in office? Is it because of what President Smith did? Maybe, maybe not. You need to show that it's the case. Or the economy is doing poorly. Is it because of President Jones? Maybe, maybe not. It could be an unwarranted assumption. Just because you have a correlation, like an association between two things, like, as X goes up, Y goes up, it doesn't mean, one causes the other. Classic example I heard from one of my professors in college. Well, you can correlate the number of drownings with amount of people ice cream eat. However, there's no causal connection. There is another factor that's causing both of those that's not stated. Because yes, it is true, you could kind of plot data, ice cream, drownings, people who drown while swimming. A lot more of those happen in the summer, much less in the winter. Why? Well, in the summer it's hot. More people are swimming in the ocean or pools. More people are eating ice cream. There's no real connection between ice cream and drowning. It's a false cause or false correlation. Correlation does not necessarily mean causation. You have to keep that in mind. Correlation does not necessarily mean causation. It could be due to something else. So how the economy is doing may or may not be related to, who's the president. This is something to watch out for if you're doing like a case study. Oh, these students' grades have gone up in the EMI program. There's no causal explanation here. It's maybe because the university has different grading policies for EMI courses. There could be some other factor too. You can't make that claim unless you have real evidence that this causes that. So one case where we do have clear causal explanations, clear evidence, okay, CO2 levels and temperatures, climate change. We have a lot of data from a lot of different sources about CO2 levels in the atmosphere during present times and even going back many centuries or even millions of years. We have data from a lot of different sources. And that correlates with CO2 levels. Thing is, we have a causal explanation. We know CO2 is a greenhouse gas. We know that it traps heat in the atmosphere. That's a fact. And the degree of temperature raise pretty much correlates with CO2 levels. So we know that is a cause and effect relationship. But in other cases, unless you have a clear cause and effect explanation and clear data, you can't necessarily assume. For example, what this company did led to increased sales. Okay, you need to have a clear explanation. It needs to be pretty apparent that this directly caused their increased sales or caused the company to go under or something like that. Sometimes there's a pretty obvious explanation. Yeah, they did something that caused consumers to dislike the company. Sales went down. Okay, that's pretty clear. But in more complicated situations, you have to make sure that the cause and effect is clear, can be demonstrated. Next, 12, a genetic fallacy. An idea is false because where it came from. Oh, that can't be true because it's from Mr. Chomsky. Maybe you don't like Chomsky. Or how can you vote for him? People from his state. How can any smart politician come from his state? They're all dumb there. How can you vote for this guy? He's from the dumb state. You're falsely assuming that a smart person, a good leader, can't come from that state. Genetic fallacy. Okay, that's it, I think, for the cause and association fallacies. Next, logic. Circular reasoning. So actually 6 and 8 kind of really are the same thing. That's one mistake. Another mistake I have here in the section of the book. Begging the question, circular reasoning, circular logic. You see this sometimes in politics. You got to cut taxes for the rich. They stimulate the economy. Well, you got to prove it. Well, just cutting taxes is better for the economy. Prove it. Just this happens sometimes in politics, sometimes with academic theories. You're just assuming something is true without actually providing evidence or explanation. Just begging the question. Let's say I just assume this theory is true. Not everyone agrees with it, and I just assume it's true. And I don't try to provide you any real reasons. Why is it? Well, it's just the way it is. The theory says so, and can you prove it? Well, it works in these cases, but do you have actual evidence that this is the case? Sometimes that happens in academic as well as political contexts. Either or fallacy, common political fallacy. It has to be this way or that way. It can't, reality is simple. It's either black and white. There's nothing in between. You're either um, a socialist who hates this country, who wants to, or you're a freedom-loving patriot, uh, as if socialist ideas are inherently bad. There's a lot of in between reality. So a false dilemma. This happens a lot in politics, science, religious debates, and such. Let's see. Next, a slippery slope. So it's kind of assuming that one thing is automatically going to lead to worse and worse things, and you're ignoring the differences between like this little thing and maybe the worst things that you imagine happening later on. This is going to automatically lead to more and more and more and more bad stuff happening. Let's say, well, in my country, a lot of states are legalizing marijuana, and so people say, "Oh, this is going to lead to, more, everybody abusing marijuana and people who are high driving and doing dangerous things, and then legalizing other drugs and such." Well, no, because we know from research marijuana is not necessarily more dangerous than, say, alcohol, excessive alcohol, and it's not addictive. It's not nearly as dangerous as other drugs. So legalizing marijuana is not going to lead to all these awful other things. Or healthcare, universal healthcare, government-assisted healthcare is going to lead to socialism, and that's not true. There are many countries like Korea with a healthcare system that are certainly not socialist. They're very capitalist countries. Western European countries, very capitalist, but they have good healthcare systems, government-paid healthcare systems. This thing doesn't lead necessarily to awful other things. Next, we have problems with evidence, empirical fallacies. Cherry picking. Let's say you select data that supports your ideas and you ignore data that doesn't support or even might disprove your ideas. There's one well-known person in linguistics named Stephen Krashen, very popular with some English teachers. He has some great ideas, but some of his claims, he made certain claims about language learning, and he cherry-picked the research literature, and he only picked certain studies that proved his point, and he ignored studies that didn't support his points or disprove some of his points. For example, cherry picking. So academic people do it, politicians do it all the time. They cherry pick data that supports their views. Next, the no two Scotsman fallacy. So imagine imagine somebody saying, "Oh, all Scotchmen drink rum." Well, I know a Scotchman who doesn't drink rum. Well, he's not a true Scotsman because all true Scotsmen drink rum. Okay, so you're just ignoring counterexamples. That's the way this is kind of set up in philosophy, the way it's explained in philosophy. I don't know why they picked a Scotsman for this example, but that's how philosophers talk about it. So you conveniently ignore counterexamples that disprove your idea. Next, overgeneralization. And actually, it's not quite the same as hasty generalization. The hasty generalization is kind of similar to the of the false cause. Kind of, it's an assumption or conclusion based on too little evidence. Likewise, but it is similar to overgeneralization, where you overgeneralize, you make conclusions about, say, a whole group of people that's not warranted. Hasty generalization is kind of just unwarranted conclusions or claims. More specifically, the overgeneralization is you make the false assumption that A and B are related when they're not, and it can overlap with the false cause. Okay, a better explanation is this. Let's say I had a bad experience with green-skinned aliens from Mars. I had a bad experience with one of them, or a few of them. Okay, so I make the assumption that all Martians are bad. Oh, all Martians are dishonest. They're going to cheat you. They're going to lie to you. That's kind of an overgeneralization. I'm overgeneralizing about a group of people, for example, and this is the root of, say, a lot of prejudice and such. I come to a conclusion that's not really based on enough evidence. just on maybe a few. That's I'm overgeneralizing about things, and you should, as they say, don't ever overgeneralize. It's always wrong. Okay, so next we have a semantic. I've got one semantic fallacy, which is 10 equivocation, and this is basically playing with word meanings. So some people say, I don't believe in the theory of evolution. It's just a theory, therefore it hasn't been proven. Okay, that's playing with two different definitions of theory. In colloquial English, theory is like a hypothesis, a guess, a conjecture. My theory is that my English professor is from Mars. It's just a guess. Okay. In science, a theory is a complex, it's an explanatory framework that's designed to explain something. It consists of several different parts or pieces. And it's not the same as a law. A law is like a really simple statement, like a law of gravity. A theory is more of a complex set of ideas that's designed to explain something. That's theory in science. And yes, the theory of evolution has been proven true. Finally, we have complex fallacies. Mainly what I have here is the straw man argument. So in politics, I can argue against my opponent by basically not really trying to understand what my opponent really believes, and I make overgeneralizations and simplistic statements and assumptions about what he believes, and I misrepresent them, I misstate them. Politicians do this all the time. His political views are too socialist, too radical for us, when you apparently haven't really tried to understand what he really believes, or what he's really advocating, the details. So you ignore the details, the nuances, and such. You make overgeneralizations, and then you misrepresent what that person believes. This happens in academia too. Person who, let's say, okay, Chomsky, for example, I don't agree with all of his ideas, but think he's got some good ideas. There's room for debate on a lot of his stuff. But some people who really hate Chomsky, they don't understand really his ideas and his different theories. There's got more than one theory, and they kind of confuse this theory and that theory. They're not the same, but they kind of combine them all together and they argue against that, and they don't even understand, each of the theories, and they say that's what he says, and it's just wrong. And they've ignored really the complexities of the theories and what the theories really say and what they really mean. There is valid room for argument and debate about his theories about language, but do it honestly. Actually understand his different theories, this theory and that theory and that theory, and don't just combine them all together and assume that the same thing. They're not. They might overlap in some areas, but they're not. And or making wrong assumptions about his motives or whatever. That's the straw man argument. So, okay, that's enough of me kind of talking. In the next lecture, I'll kind of go through some examples and maybe discuss some of these in a bit more detail. I've given a few examples briefly here. I'll say more next time. So, enough of me talking. I can't talk much anymore. All right, see you in the next lecture. See you soon. Goodbye.